The boatman's yells echo through the swamp, his cries of, "Rodney!" passing through the quagmire around him. His friend's name is met by the squawks of birds, flapping their wings in fright at the repeated shouts, then silence as they fly away. No response, no luck, and still no Rodney. It's been around a month since he vanished, and everyone else has since given up the search. Even the cops tell the boatman that his friend likely stumbled and fell into the murky waters of the swamp, drowning beneath the muddy depths. The crueler folk decide to taunt the boatman for being superstitious, telling him that perhaps Rodney was taken by the vengeful spirit of the swamp and consumed. But nothing deters the boatman from continuing the search, hopping in his dinghy and scouring the swamp, determined to not stop until he's covered every rancid inch of it. The boat drifts towards a large pipe, an old sewer opening that flushes waste out into the swamp. The smell is foul, even beneath the scarf covering the boatman's mouth and nose, protection that he's grateful for. Without it, this place would smell 1,000,000 times worse. Passing the pipe, he sweeps the beam of his flashlight down it, yelling out for Rodney again. His voice reverberates down the old metal tube, then dies down to a faint echo again. There's no reply. But just as he's about to continue his search, he spots something. Out of the corner of his eye, he's sure he notices something move. Anyone else would think nothing of it, just a rat or another local critter that's made its home in the filthy pipe. But the boatman has been searching the swamp for weeks. What if Rodney was injured and hid from the elements in the only shelter for miles around? Taking a deep, cloth-covered breath, the boatman takes a big step off his dinghy and heads into the sewer. Discolored water laden with goodness knows what trickles past his boots as he traverses the cramped passageway, heading deeper, guided by his flashlight. He yells Rodney's name again, if only to alleviate the silence inside the sewer and to distract from the anxiety that he might come across a gator somewhere down here. He tells himself that sewer gators are just an urban legend, until he spots what looks like scaled skin. Under the flashlight's beam, he takes a closer look. Reptiles shed their skin all the time, he thinks, but something's wrong here. This hasn't been shed. It's almost like it was torn. What could have ripped up a gator's hide? The sound of something shuffling towards him causes him to turn with a sudden start. His heart lurches in his chest. There's a figure standing in the path of his flashlight, disheveled, staggering like a zombie. But it's clearly Rodney. The boatman feels a wave of relief and calls out to his friend one more time, then watches as Rodney bursts. The boatman's stunned silence quickly becomes a pained scream of terror, one that causes him to drop his flashlight. As it rolls along the sewer pipe, it illuminates the thing crawling out from what little is left of Rodney. Numerous things. The same things that are lining the ceiling of the pipe, bristling, waiting. Collectively, they detect the presence of a new animal nearby, a new host. In accordance with SCP Foundation containment procedures, the organism designated as SCP-751 is to be kept in a hermetically sealed container. Within this 1 cubic meter space, humidity levels are kept at a high enough level for the organism to survive, and nutrients to feed SCP-751 are injected into the container on a daily basis. However, should a containment breach occur, then this parasitic life form will be compelled to seek out a more substantial food source. Hence its colloquial nickname among Foundation staff, the Organ Eater. As the nickname suggests, when left unchecked, SCP-751's primary diet consists of internal organs, with no differentiating between those of animals and those of humans. In its natural state, SCP-751 has a body mass of only around 2 kilograms, with no clearly defined shape. That is, before it infests a host. This anomalous parasite's amorphous body consists of an unknown substance with the same consistency as gelatin, pale white in coloration, with red veins streaking across the majority of its surface area. Upon closer examination by Foundation researchers and experts in parasitic lifeforms, it has been discovered that SCP-751's veins do, in fact, contain blood. Except, it's human blood, and seemingly stolen at that. This blood has been analyzed and was discovered to be a mixture of blood gathered from previous hosts to the parasite, which has been laced with various additional chemicals. While a full chemical composition of SCP-751 has been compiled by Foundation researchers and recorded in Document 751-C, the majority of additional substances present within the parasite are similar in nature and function to numerous anesthetics and immunosuppressants. In layman's terms, the organism possesses its own internal chemicals that can numb sensations, particularly pain, or induce sleep, similar to the drugs applied to patients undergoing surgery or other invasive medical procedures, as well as other chemicals that can inhibit a creature's or person's immune system. This is responsible for combating foreign objects present within an organism, particularly on a cellular level, wherein antibodies attack unidentified cells that could be the result of an infection. In medicine, immunosuppressant drugs are often administered in humans in order to prevent a person's body from rejecting an organ transplanted into their body from somebody else, like a kidney, liver, or even a heart. SCP-751's exact origin remains unknown to the Foundation. Specimens of the parasite have been discovered dwelling in damp environments, particularly those with close proximity to fresh water, naturally occurring bodies of water that contain lower concentrations of salt. Other areas in which the Foundation has encountered SCP-751 occurring have included swamps, rainforests, and sewers, with the organism requiring access to water in order to survive. Without exposure to water, the parasite will succumb to dehydration and ultimately die within a maximum of 12 hours. All of these elements seem to suggest to some Foundation researchers that SCP-751 is a naturally occurring organism and that it must have evolved to function in the way that it does. Theories range from the mildly plausible to the outright bizarre. One researcher has posited the idea that SCP-751 is an evolutionary descendant of some previously undocumented prehistoric bacterial life form, or even a genetic offshoot of an existing strain of rare but deadly flesh-eating bacteria. This possible explanation for SCP-751's origin was refuted by another researcher who conducted an hour and 35-minute presentation, with an intermission for snacks, that provided a different explanation. According to this second researcher, SCP-751 is an amoeba-like organism that originated from outer space, evolving as bacteria on a meteorite that then collided with a military satellite, altering its trajectory and causing both the meteorite and the satellite to crash land on Earth in the proximity of Arborville, California in 1988. It is worth noting that during this presentation, another member of staff stood up and began berating the presenting researcher, instead presenting a third, unfounded theory, that SCP-751 was actually the result of a military experiment to develop a biological weapon during the Cold War. The presenting researcher retorted by claiming he was getting to that part and scolded his heckler for disrupting the flow of his theory. The pair's argument then escalated into a full-blown fistfight, with senior research personnel being forced to intervene and security teams eventually breaking up the altercation. The Foundation's Human Resources Department has since placed both arguing staff members on temporary sabbatical and warned them against watching too many movies instead of conducting actual research into anomalies. However, the notion that SCP-751 is a naturally occurring parasitic life form is seemingly undermined by the chemicals that have been discovered within specimens. The fact is that it seems to be able to produce anesthetics and immunosuppressants that are much more akin to man-made drugs than any naturally occurring compounds with these properties. Any creature capable of producing these man-made substances is unlikely to have evolved naturally. Speculation has recently begun spreading among Foundation researchers that SCP-751 could, in fact, have been genetically engineered, possibly even through some unknown anomalous means. Whether or not there is any legitimacy to this idea is still unknown, and Foundation investigations into the matter are still yet to yield any definitive, conclusive evidence. As for who exactly is responsible for creating an anomalous parasitic life form, and to what end, these are questions that currently remain unanswered. The Foundation is looking into several potential groups of interest it considers to be the culprits for creating SCP-751, however, determining exactly who possesses the knowledge of genetics and bioengineering it would require to develop a parasite like this. In terms of why, the theory about SCP-751 intended to be deployed as a biological weapon seems to be plausible, given how it behaves, especially when interacting with human biology. In terms of behavior, particularly motor function, SCP-751 displays clear movement ability despite not possessing any limbs, bones, or muscle tissue. Provided it is able to maintain an adequate amount of exposure to water, a specimen of SCP-751 will move independently across terrains, including through sewer pipes and along water lines, as they seek out a host. However, there are a few notable exceptions. These parasites are unable to traverse drier, sandy areas and cannot survive in bodies of salt water for extended periods of time. Through observation and examination of their behavior patterns, Foundation researchers have determined that SCP-751 parasites likely possess an olfactory sense of some description. Even if they don't have any actual sensory organs, it seems that they can detect carbon dioxide and octanol, which are both commonly found in human breath and sweat. This is seemingly how SCP-751 specimens hunt down potential mammalian hosts. Upon tracking down a suitable host, an SCP-751 parasite will wait until the animal or person has fallen asleep, possibly by sensing that its target's respiration is slowing down, as during sleep, animals release lower levels of CO2 when exhaling. By this point, an SCP-751 specimen will have had to travel a considerable distance from its water-rich habitat, and this compels them to begin their feeding process. This begins when the amorphous anomalous organism slithers on top of a target, settling over its stomach region. Given that they possess little in the way of any protective barrier surrounding their gelatin-like bodies, this enables SCP-751 to effectively trick their hosts' bodies, allowing them to be absorbed into the target's skin through osmosis. Given that the skin effectively senses an SCP-751 as a harmless liquid, its naturally porous properties allow the parasites to enter their hosts undetected, at which point the anesthetics in their veins are dispersed. The numbing, sleep-inducing properties of these chemicals keep their hosts in a sedated state, preventing them from waking up during the initial absorption process. Once an SCP-751 parasite has successfully latched onto a host and has been absorbed into their body through the skin, what follows is a deeply unpleasant feeding process. One that is made all the more unnerving by the fact that victims of SCP-751 are rendered completely unaware of what is happening to them until it is too late. At present, there is no known way to either prevent or even slow down the parasite's feeding. Making its way inside its host, the organism will rest within its stomach, reshaping itself in such a way that it lines their gastrointestinal walls, the layers of specialized tissue that produce the enzymes and stomach acid necessary for digesting food. Having effectively blocked its target from digesting normally, an SCP-751 parasite will then alter itself in such a way that it mimics the composition and function of the host's stomach, allowing them to still safely eat and carry out the digestive process as normal, and enabling SCP-751 to reside inside their body without risking being detected. This adaptation normally takes between roughly 2 to 3 hours, which explains why the parasites target victims who are asleep, making them less likely to notice, thanks in part to the anesthetics. After their host has reawakened, there will be no evidence present that they have contracted an SCP-751 parasite, and as such, will continue their ordinary daily routine as if nothing has changed. Over the course of the next 3 to 4 days, an infected victim will continue to be unaware that their body is being used as a host by an SCP-751 specimen. Meanwhile, during this time frame, the parasite will have already begun feeding by digesting their victim's stomach. Keep in mind, while the gradual dissolving of a person's or animal's stomach would, under normal circumstances, trigger intense pain and possibly even send the victim into shock, SCP-751's unique physiology allows it to mimic the now missing stomach, while also preventing the pain of consuming its target's digestive system from being detected thanks to the anesthetics it naturally releases. Additionally, its immunosuppressant properties prevent the host's immune system from detecting a foreign presence within the body and creating antibodies to attack it. At most, subjects known to be carrying instances of SCP-751 display little in the way of symptoms beyond slight fatigue and numbness to sensation caused by the anesthetic present in their systems. After successfully digesting its host stomach and digestive system, SCP-751 begins to expand, absorbing these internal organs in order to increase its mass. Bear in mind, the average intestine alone can measure up to 15 feet, with an average stomach being around 12 inches long by 6 inches across at its widest point. With this additional mass, SCP-751 will then spread throughout the host's bodies, consuming more of their internal organs, adding to its own mass, and fueling further expansion. Generally starting with the stomach and intestines, the parasite then moves to the liver, then the kidneys, and gradually starts devouring the lungs after these. After each organ is successfully consumed, as it does with the stomach, SCP-751 alters parts of its growing mass in order to perfectly mimic the shape, composition, and function of each digested organ in turn. Through the continuous release of anesthetics to dull the pain of this internal organ consumption and the immunosuppressant chemicals that prevent it from being rejected by antibodies, SCP-751 is able to keep eating the organs of its victim. Eventually, the entirety of their internal bodily functions are carried out by SCP-751, mimicking the organs it has eaten, a process which normally takes approximately a whole month in human victims and slightly longer when SCP-751 targets larger animals. Upon the completion of this month-long feeding process, once all of a host's organs have been consumed by the parasite, an SCP-751 specimen will revert back to its original gelatinous composition, now much larger, thanks to the mass accumulated from feeding on its host's organs. Where feeding is slow and methodical, the reversion from mimicking entire organs back to an amorphous invertebrate is near instantaneous, occurring within a few minutes. Of course, you're most likely wondering what this means for the host, whose internal bodily functions have been maintained by SCP-751 imitating their organs up until now. The process of returning to its original composition considerably lowers the density of SCP-751's structure and causes it to swell. This occurs to such a degree that the host's body can no longer contain the creature inside it and forces their body to expand. In observations made by the SCP Foundation, this is the messiest part of an SCP-751 infection. The victim's skin stretches until its elasticity reaches its limit, bursting as it releases the grown and considerably larger SCP-751 parasite. There is little left of the host other than bones, torn, overstretched skin, and a lot of blood. The lingering question is, what is the point? What purpose does this insidious cycle of feeding on a host's organs and needlessly cruel expiration of their bodies serve? Well, as with many parasitic life forms, SCP-751's primary biological directive is to reproduce, and this occurs after bursting out of a depleted host's body. The excess mass of the parasite's body from consuming a victim's organs is bisected into between 10 and 20 smaller pieces. Each of these is a fully separate entity and is classified as a new specimen of SCP-751. The moment that this bisection occurs, these newly created parasites will be drawn towards damp areas and begin a slithering migration towards their new habitats. Once there, they grow through exposure to fresh water in preparation as they await new hosts to hunt, and thus, the cycle repeats itself. For a time, the SCP Foundation sought to find a practical medical application for SCP-751, and a request was made by a Foundation scientist to modify a specimen as part of an experiment. It was thought that if the parasite could be tricked into only mimicking the function and composition of a single organ in perpetuity without consuming any of the surrounding organs, then SCP-751 could serve as a potential solution to shortages in organ donors. This would have made them ideal for patients awaiting vital organ transplants, given the parasite's ability to recreate and carry out important bodily functions without the risk of being rejected. Receiving approval from the Foundation, the scientist attempts to make a number of alterations to the SCP-751 specimen, trying to find a way to inhibit its natural hunger and instinct to feed on organs. Isolating a specific function of its biology proves tricky, but the scientist believes he has found a way to biologically hack into the parasite through the aid of a specially developed cybernetic implant that he designed to suppress the SCP-751 specimen's appetite. The Foundation then authorizes the use of the augmented parasite specimen on a member of D-Class personnel, currently interred in Foundation medical care and being kept on life support thanks to having suffered multiple critical organ failures as the result of testing with another anomaly. As a first test goes, this is widely considered to be a trial by fire, one that won't turn out well. Initially, the modified SCP-751 specimen seems to behave as intended, restructuring itself into a new heart, lungs, and liver for the afflicted D-Class patient. The scientist monitors the growth of the parasite through the specialized implant, noting that it seems to just be assimilating and replacing the patient's damaged organs, not eating the few that are still functioning normally. The patient regains consciousness and is removed from life support. Within less than an hour, he's functioning normally. All seems to be going well, until an alarm sounds. The patient, having been returned to the rest of the general D-Class population, is observed suffering a sudden spike in adrenaline. Medical personnel are sent to assess him, while security staff keep other D-Classes from interfering. All present witness what follows. The augmented SCP-751 triggers the expansion that would normally occur after it had successfully eaten its host's organs. However, thanks to the augmentations the scientist has made to the parasite, it not only stays within the patient as his body begins splitting at the seams, but also retains control over the host body after his brain has shut down due to the shock and blood loss. What ensues is a containment breach, as security forces scramble to detain a hybrid creature, part human and part parasite. Any personnel unlucky enough to be close enough to the hybrid at the moment of transformation are caught by tendrils through which the SCP-751 parasite's gelatinous form is able to reach into its victims' bodies, breaking down and absorbing all of their internal organs in a matter of seconds, without releasing the anesthetic that the organism naturally produces. The hybrid is contained and neutralized by security personnel equipped with liquid nitrogen canisters, freezing the creature solid until its augmented body shatters. Foundation higher-ups deem the death toll incurred by the containment breach to be acceptable losses. Further experimentation into using SCP-751 for human organ transplants is set to continue shortly, and who knows what horrors may come from it. Check out the DrBob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of DrBob, like the Body Harvester, SCP-5172.